dozens of missing kids vanished into the shadows of our cities, but a massive law enforcement crackdown just pulled them back to safety.
It's a striking reality, honestly, and it perfectly captures exactly what our police and investigators are facing on the streets right now.
Right. I mean, the sheer scale of these operations is something most people just never see.
Yeah.
We're talking about major, highly coordinated sweeps.
Yeah, absolutely massive.
Like in a recent mission called Operation Safe Return, the U.S. Marshals partnered with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department and rescued 37 missing kids.
We're talking about teenagers here, right?
Exactly. Kids ages 14 to 17, taken right off the streets of California and some neighboring states. The police arrested 7 suspects, landing a massive federal blow to child sex trafficking.
Which is incredible, but we really need to broaden the scope here, too, because the effort extends way beyond California.
Oh, for sure.
The U.S. Marshals recently concluded another major sweep called Operation We Will Find You Too. They located 200 missing children nationwide in just 6 weeks.
Wait, 200 kids in 6 weeks?
Yeah, 6 weeks. And the most critical detail there is that they pulled 123 of those kids directly out of dangerous, active situations. I mean, it just proves that law enforcement never stops hunting for the vulnerable.
It really does. You know, if you are listening to this right now, you might think this kind of thing only happens in movies or like far away in some distant city.
Right, like it's somebody else's problem.
Exactly. But today, we are doing a deep dive into these intense, coordinated efforts by law enforcement to rescue missing and exploited children happening right under our noses.
In our own backyards.
Yeah. I was looking through the stack of documents we pulled for today. We've got police department manuals, FBI operation reports, California Department of Justice data.
And the historical files of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, too.
Right. So the mission for this deep dive is to show you exactly how the good guys track down the bad guys.
We're going to look at the strict, unyielding rules that guide these rescues, the forensic science behind them, and really how local communities are fighting to protect traditional family safety.
Because this deep dive will equip you to understand the real battle for law and order happening every single day.
Yeah, the front lines of the fight.
So we just heard the shocking numbers.
Yeah.
37 kids here, 200 kids there. But let's look at exactly what these tactical rescue missions look like on the ground.
Right, the actual operations.
Look at Operation Lost Angels, which was led by the FBI. They recovered 33 children, and 8 of those kids were actively being sexually exploited at the exact moment of rescue.
It's heavy stuff, but these multi-agency task forces bring together local police, federal agents, and social workers. And speed is their greatest weapon.
Speed really is everything.
Definitely. During Operation We Will Find You Too, an impressive 57% of the missing kids were recovered within just 7 days of the U.S. Marshals stepping in.
Wow, 7 days. That speed makes all the difference, especially when you read the specific success stories in our sources.
Oh, yeah, like the Michigan case.
Yes. There was a 16-year-old girl from Michigan who was being controlled by a 30-year-old man. The Marshals tracked them all the way across state lines to an apartment in Indiana.
Just relentless tracking.
Right. And when police moved in to secure the location, the suspect actually tried to jump out a window to escape.
Which is crazy.
But a police K-9 unit was waiting below and just stopped him cold. And the girl was saved.
See, that is fantastic tactical police work right there. The coordination required to execute a breach like that across state lines is immense.
It's like a military rescue mission.
Exactly. But what's fascinating here is the tragic reality of what happens after the physical rescue. The FBI notes that victims often return to trafficking situations either voluntarily or by force, fraud, or coercion. They call this dangerous cyclical environment the track.
Okay, let's unpack this, because reading that part of the FBI report actually made me stop and reread it.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
It really is. Why do some of these kids end up getting rescued multiple times? Like, if a SWAT team or a K-9 unit just pulled you out of a nightmare, why on earth would you go back to the person who put you there?
Well, it comes down to severe psychological manipulation. These criminals do not just lock a door, right? They trap kids in a complex cycle of abuse and dependency.
Right.
The victims often do not even realize they are being trafficked in the traditional sense. A trafficker might groom them into believing they are in a loving romantic relationship.
Ugh, that's just sick.
It is. Or on the darker end of the spectrum, the victim might be completely terrified of violent retaliation against themselves or their families if they dare to stay away.
It's almost like the trafficker has installed invisible shock collars on these kids. Even when the physical door is kicked wide open by the police and they are offered an exit, the psychological programming prevents them from running.
Or worse, it pulls them right back.
Exactly.
That is exactly the mechanism at play. And this psychological chain is exactly why law enforcement must constantly remain vigilant. You cannot just rescue a child once and check a box.
Right. The job isn't done.
No, the social workers, the psychologists, and the courts have to work together to break that invisible shock collar, as you called it, to keep them safe long term.
Now, that canine takedown in Indiana is a huge win. But it makes me wonder, how did the marshals even know to look in that specific apartment?
That's the real investigative work.
Right. We see the dramatic tactical rescues on the news, but those door-kicking moments only happen because there is a massive invisible data net that gets cast the very second a child goes missing.
Absolutely. The foundation of these operations is built on shared databases and rigid zero-tolerance protocols. Law enforcement cannot act on information they do not have.
Right.
Look at the Los Angeles County Sheriff's policy as a prime example of this infrastructure. By policy, there is absolutely no waiting period to report a missing person.
Which completely shatters that old television trope. You always see in movies that panicked parents are told they have to wait 24 or 48 hours to report someone missing.
Yeah, that's a total myth now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Here, the policy mandates that police must enter a missing child into the National Crime Information Center system, the NCIC, within 1 hour. 1 single hour.
And we have to look at why that specific 1 hour window is so tactically critical. If a trafficker gets a child into a car and hits the interstate at 70 miles an hour, in 24 hours, they could be 1,000 miles away, right?
Crossing multiple state lines.
Exactly. But in 1 hour, they're likely still inside the county. Entering that data into the NCIC within 60 minutes instantly freezes the trafficker's movements.
Because everyone is looking for them.
Right. Any highway patrol officer running a license plate or checking an ID suddenly has eyes on that missing child.
Wow. It shows that when lives are on the line, law enforcement doesn't mess around with red tape. They're cutting off the escape routes immediately. And that rapid response network extends directly into local schools, too. By policy, police provide written notification to a child's school within 10 days of a disappearance, complete with bulletins and photos.
Which is super smart.
Yeah. Why 10 days? Because kids are creatures of habit, and traffickers sometimes attempt to keep up appearances or move victims through familiar social circles. This puts eyes on the ground where the child might normally appear.
Exactly. And, the legal framework supporting these rapid responses got a major necessary upgrade recently. The Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act of 2015 cut right through the federal bureaucracy.
Okay, let's talk about the before and after of that law, because it completely changed the game for the U.S. Marshals.
It was a massive shift.
Right. Before 2015, the Marshals, who are arguably the best fugitive hunters on the entire planet, could only go after a missing kid if there was already an active warrant for a specific bad guy. Their jurisdiction was tied to the fugitive, not the victim.
Which was incredibly frustrating for law enforcement. I mean, they would know a child was in danger, but lack the explicit legal authority to lead the hunt because they didn't know the name of the trafficker yet.
Their hands were tied.
Yeah, they were. The 2015 Act flipped the script. It allowed the U.S. Marshals to hunt for the child as the primary objective, even if they have no idea who took them. It essentially unchained the Marshals, allowing them to use their elite tracking skills purely for rescue.
That is a massive shift in how we prioritize the victims and support the police. And speaking of prioritizing victims, we must also look at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, or NCMEC.
Right, NCMEC.
They were founded back in 1984 after the tragic, highly publicized abduction cases of Adam Walsh and Eaton Patz.
Yeah, the landscape before 1984 was remarkably fragmented. If a child went missing, local police had very few ways to share that information nationally.
It was the era of missing kids printed on the back of milk cartons.
Exactly. NCMEC centralized everything. Since their founding, their cyber tick line has processed over 100 million reports of exploitation.
Wait, 100 million reports. That number is just staggering.
Yeah.
It really contextualizes the sheer scale of the digital and physical threat.
It is a staggering
Imagine
volume
finding
of
out
data.
your electric bill
And to
is
combat a
secretly
threat of that
funding the
magnitude,
government's massive
higher-level
spending
departments
addiction.
have to
It
bring
is
cutting-edge
a pretty
science
shocking
into the
realization
mix.
when you actually
For
look
example,
at
the
the math.
California
Right.
Department of
Well,
Justice
imagine for a
utilizes a
second that you
highly
have a savings
specialized
account.
missing persons DNA
And
program.
So how does that actually
you
work
swore
in
to
the
your
field?
family, hand over heart,
Like for the
that
detectives
this
on the
money
ground?
was
Well,
strictly
they
for
assist
fixing a
local
leaking
agencies
roof.
by matching physical
said,
characteristics,
"If we don't
fingerprints,
fix this
dental
roof,
x-rays, and
the house is
familial
gonna
DNA.
collapse."
Oh,
It's
wow.
an existential
Yeah,
crisis
so if a
for the
local
house.
precinct
Exactly.
hits a
It's the
dead
Save the
end,
House
the state
fund.
DOJ
But then,
steps
your car
in to
breaks
analyze
down,
trace
you
evidence
spend a little too
found at a
much on
suspected
groceries,
safe
you've
house.
got bills piling up.
Or they
So
run
what do?
familial
You raid the
DNA
roof
to
fund.
identify John
You
or
take
Jane
that money,
Doe's.
pay off your
That's
credit
incredible
cards, and tell your
technology.
family,
It
hey,
is.
don't
They
worry,
do
we'll
not
fix
just
the
search the
roof later.
streets. They
Right.
use advanced
And in
forensic
this
science to
scenario,
bring families
the roof
closure,
is the planet,
even in the
or at
absolute
least
worst
Maryland's
case scenario.
climate
Now that we
goals.
know how the
And
physical
the car is a
digital tracking
massive,
works,
self-inflicted,
we need to clearly define the crimes law
$1.5
enforcement is actually
billion
fighting.
Right,
state
definitions
budget
matter.
deficit.
A
Words
completely
matter
avoidable deficit,
immensely
I might add.
when you're
Welcome
charging
to the deep
criminals and
dive.
taking them to court.
Today we're exploring a
Based
classic
on the
case
notes from
of
the San
fiscal
Diego
sleight of
Human
hand
Trafficking
coming
Task
out of
Force
Annapolis.
and the California Shield
We're
Manual.
looking at the strategic
There is
energy
a
investment
stark
fund,
legal difference between
SAFE.
human smuggling and
It's a
human
huge
trafficking.
pot of
There
money
is, and
meant to
precision
save
in
the
language
environment.
is the key
But it's turning
to
into a
securing
hidden
a
tax
conviction.
on every single
You cannot
person
effectively
paying an
fight an
electric
enemy
bill
if you
in
do
Maryland.
not define their
It
crimes
really is. It's
accurately
become the
in
center of
court
a
law.
huge
Right.
political
So
fight.
let's define
You've
smuggling
got
first.
a Democratic governor,
According to the
frustrated
legal
environmentalists
definitions,
making
smuggling
some very
is
awkward
primarily a
compromises,
crime
and
against the
conservative
nation.
critics
It's a
who are
border
rightly
issue.
calling this whole thing a
Exactly.
shell
It
game.
inherently
game.
requires
And when you
crossing
look
an
at the
international
documents we
border.
have today,
The
reports,
person actually consents
budget
to be
proposals,
smuggled,
critiques
and once
from
they
Senate
cross the border,
Republicans,
they are free to
it is
leave.
really hard
It
to
does not
unsee it.
require
Our
any
mission for
form
this
of
deep dive is
labor or
simple.
sexual
Follow the money.
exploitation. It is
Always
basically
follow the
an
money.
illegal
We are going to
transportation
see
contract.
how a fund
It is an
designed
illicit
to fight
transaction
climate
regarding
change
a
is
sovereign
being
border.
used to plug
Human
holes in the
trafficking,
state
on the other
budget.
hand, is a
And
crime
we'll dig
against
into
a
the
person.
argument that
Right.
this
It
isn't
is not
found
money
money
at
slavery.
all.
It requires
This is
zero
essentially
movement.
a
You can be
backdoor tax
trafficked
on
without ever
families.
leaving your hometown
Let's get right
or
into
even
it.
your own house.
The strategic
And
energy
the
investment
consent
fund
aspect
sounds
is
very
totally
official,
different, too.
very important. The
What does it
victim
actually
never
do?
consents
Well,
to trafficking.
on paper,
They are held
it is the
by
state's
force,
green piggy
fraud,
bank.
or coercion.
The SIF is
They are
managed
not
by
free
the
to leave,
Maryland Energy
and they are
Administration.
actively
Its
exploited
whole
for
stated
labor
purpose
or
is
sex.
to
Yeah,
reduce
exactly.
energy bills,
So what
cut
does this all
waste,
mean
and
for the
fund
actual charges?
renewable
Wait,
energy.
Like solar
slightly
panels
confused
and
on one
efficiency
point.
Okay,
upgrades.
what's that?
Exactly.
If someone pays
But
a
here is the
coyote
real aha
to
moment of the
smuggle them
story.
across the border, so they can
Where
send them
does
to
the
that
money
part,
actually
but then the smuggler
come
locks
from?
them in a safe
Because
house on
they
the
aren't
other
just
side and
taxing
forces
you
them to work
directly
off the
for it.
debt. Didn't they
No, and
consent
that's why
initially?
politicians
Does the
absolutely
crime
love it. It
suddenly
feels
change
free.
midstream?
So about 40%
If we
comes from
connect this to
regional
the
carbon
bigger
auctions.
picture, that is exactly where
big
the legal
chunk,
pivot
the one
happens.
growing
Yes,
like crazy,
the crime changes
comes with something
midstream.
called
Oh, really?
alternative
Yeah.
compliance
The initial
payments.
act was smuggling a crime
ACPs.
against
Which
the
is just a
border.
fancy government
but
term
the
for a fine.
absolute
Right.
moment
It's a
that
fine for failure.
coercion,
Let me break it
force, or
down.
fraud is
Maryland
introduced
law
to hold that
forces
person
utility
against their
companies
will
to
and
buy a
exploit
certain
them,
amount
the
of green
consent
energy.
evaporates.
They have to
Wow.
prove they're
It
using
instantly
renewables.
becomes
But if they
human
can't find
trafficking,
that green
a crime
energy, or if
against
it's
the
just way
person.
too expensive
I
on the
think
market.
pointing this out
Which
is
it
so
usually
important
Yeah,
because
the
mixing
state gives
these
them an
terms
escape
up
hatch.
helps
The
criminals
utility can
hide
just
in
pay a
plain
fee
sight.
directly to the state instead.
Calling it
That fee
smuggling
is the
when it's
ACP.
really trafficking
And here's the
Yeah.
kicker.
minimizes the sheer
Utilities are
horror of what these
increasingly
victims
just
actually
paying
endure.
the fine
It really
because
does.
It's cheaper than
It
actually
downgrades
buying
modern-day
the green
slavery
energy.
into a mere
So
immigration
the climate
violation
fund
in
is
the
getting
public's mind.
incredibly
Exactly.
rich.
Knowing that distinct
Precisely
difference
because
dictates exactly how
the green
police
energy
charge the
mandates
bad
are failing.
guys,
Precisely.
what task
It is a
forces are
completely
activated,
perverse
and how
incentive.
prosecutors put
The
them
government
behind
made
bars
the
for
mandates
decades
so aggressive,
instead of
and the market
months.
is
Right,
so
getting these
distorted
bad guys
that
off the
power
streets
companies
for
are
good.
just writing checks to
So
the state
we
instead
have
of going
established that the
green.
police,
stats
the
on
federal
this are just
agents, and the
staggering.
Border Patrol
are.
the ultimate
In
shield.
2022,
The first line of
this revenue
defense,
was $77
but they cannot
million.
be on every single
By
street corner.
2025,
The final
it
line of
jumped to
defense is the local community.
$365
If you're listening to this
million.
right now, you might be
Wow.
thinking, well, I don't
From
hang out in
77
sketchy areas. I
million
wouldn't
to
see this.
365
Right.
million
But the
in 3
sources
years.
show
Right,
these
so
kids
now the
aren't just
state
in
has
dark
this
alleys. how do
massive
regular
accidental
citizens
pot of
spot a
gold.
victim in broad
It's
daylight?
supposedly for
Well,
green
the
projects.
clinical indicators
But remember, that
provided in
money
the
didn't
task
just
force
fall out of the
manuals are
sky. The
essential
utility
here.
companies
Doctors,
paid those fines.
nurses, teachers,
And do you
or
think
even
those
people just
massive
walking down the
corporations
street
just ate that
can
cost
spot
out of
these
the
red
goodness of their
flags if
hearts?
they know what to look
Oh,
for.
absolutely
What kind
not.
of
They
red
pass
flags?
every
The
single
sources
penny of
break
that
them
onto the
down into
customer.
three
Exactly. It
distinct
shows up
categories:
right on your electric bill.
behavioral,
So you,
physical,
the everyday
and
ratepayer,
material.
are
Okay,
paying
let's
for
look
the
at the
utility's
behavioral signs
failure to
first.
meet a government
A
mandate.
victim might
The
have a
state collects your money,
hyper-controlling partner
drops it
or
in the safe,
manager
and says,
who never
look
leaves
at all
their
this cash
side
we have for the
and answers
climate.
every
Which
single
brings us to
question
the
for them.
raid.
Yeah, they speak for them entirely.
Because that
Right.
money is
The
definitely
victim
not
might not
staying
even
in
know
the
their own
climate
home
fund.
address.
Not anymore.
And they
Enter Governor
frequently have
Wes
absolutely
Moore.
no access
His
to their own
administration
personal
is
ID or
staring down a
passport.
projected
Physically, the
$1.5
signs can be
billion
brutal, but
budget
sometimes they
deficit.
are subtle.
$1.5
Medical
billion.
professionals look for
You can't just
suspicious
ignore a
injuries
hole
where
that
the
deep.
explanation just does not
And
match
when
the
government
medical history.
overspends
Like
to
a
that
story that
degree,
doesn't
they
add
start
up.
checking under the
Exactly.
couch cushions
Victims
for
often
loose
lack
change.
regular health care,
Except here,
have
the
frequent
couch
sexually
cushion is the
transmitted
green
infections,
energy
or
fund,
even present
and
with
the loose
physical
change
branding.
is hundreds of
Branding.
millions of taxpayer
Like
dollars.
actual brand.
So what's the actual
Yeah,
proposal? How much
traffickers
are they
actually
taking?
use
The governor's
tattoos
plan
like
diverts
barcodes,
$292
names, or
million
dollar lines directly
to
from the
physically
safe
mark
into the state's
humans
general
as
fund.
their personal
Just to balance
property.
the books.
That is just
Just
pure
to cover their
evil.
overspending.
Materially, you
They
are looking for
using
strange
energy
discrepancies
fines to
that
pay
don't fit the
for
picture.
general government operations.
For example, a young teenager
bureaucracy,
carrying
salaries,
3
office
different cell
supplies, you
phones.
name it.
But
Or
that's not even
carrying
all of it.
incredibly
I read in the
expensive
sources
designer
there's also a
purses and wearing
rebate
clothes
scheme
that they
Yes,
clearly
this
cannot
is the part
afford
critics are
based
calling
on
a
their
political
situation.
sweetener.
Right. Things
They're
that just look
grabbing
out of
another
place.
You need to care
$100
about this
million
because these
out of
kids
the
walk
fund
into
to
your
give
local
a
urgent care,
one-time
or they stand
$40
in line
rebate
right
to
behind you at the
eligible
grocery store.
households.
Knowing these
You're
signs
bust.
makes you an
So let me get
extra
this
set
straight.
of eyes
The
for law
state
enforcement.
mandates drive up
And
energy
everyday
costs.
citizens are
The utility
stepping
companies
up in
pass those
incredible
massive
ways to
costs to you
supplement
and
law
me.
enforcement. We are
Our
seeing
bills go up by
volunteer
hundreds
groups
of
doing
dollars a
massive
year.
amounts of heavy lifting
And then the
behind
governor
scenes.
takes
Here's
a
where it
chunk
gets
of our
really
own money,
interesting.
hands us
There is
back
a
a
specific
crisp
group mentioned in
$40
our
bill,
sources called
and
Saved in
basically
America.
says,
Oh, yeah,
you're
they do
welcome.
great
That
work.
is the exact
really do.
math. It's
Yeah.
wild.
They are made
and
up
if you
of
look at the
former
recent
elite
supplemental
military
budget, they're
operators
cutting or
and
shifting another
retired
$80
police
million.
officers
When you
who
add all
now
this
work
up,
as
this
licensed
raid
private
depletes the fund by
investigators.
82%.
82%
These guys
of the
have
fund
logged
wiped
over
out.
60,000
leaving only about
volunteer hours
164
to help
million for the
locate kids in
actual green
places like
initiatives it
California's
was legally
Central
meant
Valley.
for.
That's
That
incredible
is not
dedication.
a trim. Right. That's a
They
total
step in,
gutting.
use their professional
And this is where
tracking
the
skills,
politics gets super
and help
interesting.
desperate parents
Because you would assume the
entirely free of
environmentalist
charge.
This
groups
raises
like
an
the
important
Sierra
question,
Club
though.
or the Chesapeake
How do we
Climate
balance
Action
trusting our
Network,
gut when we see these
you'd
signs
assume
in
they'd be
public with
furious.
letting the
They
trained
were
professionals handle
initially
the actual
when
dangerous
this first
interventions?
leaked.
That's a
They
good
called it
point.
unacceptable.
It requires
They
a
said it
very
was a
delicate
huge
partnership.
mistake to use
Vigilantism
this
can
money
compromise
as a petty
investigations or
cash
get people
drawer.
killed.
But then they
Citizens
folded.
must
They
observe
completely
and report
folded.
the red
Now
flags to
they
the
are
NCIC
actually
or local
supporting
police,
parts of the
but we
governor's spending
absolutely
plan.
must let law
Talk about
enforcement and
strange
licensed professionals
bedfellows.
execute the
Why
actual
on earth would they do
rescues.
that?
Leave the door
If they
kicking to the
truly
pros.
believe climate change is an existential
So,
crisis,
to wrap up today's deep
why let
dive,
the
we
state
learned
raid
that
the
law
survival
enforcement is
fund?
taking the
It's
fight
just
directly
raw
to the
political
criminals.
calculation.
They
They
are
know
rescuing
voters are getting
hundreds of
crushed
children
by inflation
through
and high energy
massive,
bills
highly
right now.
coordinated
If
sweeps
these
like
green groups
Operation
attack
Safe
a
Return and
$40
Operation
rebate,
Week,
even if it's a
we will
total
find you.
gimmick,
Right.
they
We
look like they
explored
don't
the
care about
invisible
working
data
families.
nets that
So they
catch
have
these
to play the
criminals.
They are
like the strict
swallowing a
1
very
hour
bitter
reporting
pill.
rules that
In
trigger
exchange for
rapid
letting the
manhunts.
governor
We
raid
also
the fund
clarified the
today,
stark legal
they are
difference
lobbying
between
for a
human
new
smuggling
law
and
to
human
create a funding
trafficking,
floor in the
demonstrating
future.
how
Meaning what
coercion
exactly?
changes
Meaning
the very
they want to
nature of the
guarantee
crime.
that the
From a
state will
border issue
mandate
to modern-day
roughly
slavery.
$365
And
million
finally, we
a
outlined the
year on
specific
climate
physical,
spending moving
behavioral,
forward.
and
So they are
material
throwing
red
today's
flags that empower
taxpayers
our
under
local
the bus
communities to
to
spot
lock
hidden
in a permanent
dangers in
claim
broad
on your
daylight.
wallet later. It
That's
takes
the
every
gamble.
layer of
And
society
it brings us
working
right
together,
to the core
from the U.S.
conservative
Marshals
critique.
down to the grocery store
People
clerk
like
to
Senate
protect our
Minority Leader
families.
Steve Hershey
But before
aren't
we sign off,
buying
there's
this
one more
spin
building
at all.
concept from
Not
our
for a
sources
second.
that
Let's
we
walk
need to
through
touch
their
on.
argument
What's
because
that?
it really exposes the
NCMXC
math
recently
here.
launched a
They
new
call it
service
the
called the
hidden
Take It
tax.
Down
Right.
tool.
Let's be
It is a
rigorous about
completely
this
free
logic.
service that helps
Step
scrub
one, the
explicit
state
images
forces
of
a green
minors
mandate that is
completely off
totally
the internet.
disconnected from
It
economic
actively
reality.
blocks the
Step
content
two,
from being shared or
utilities can't
uploaded
meet
across
it, so they
major
pay the
social media
massive fine.
platforms.
That's
Step
amazing.
three,
It is
utilities
a critical
raise your electric
proactive
defense
defense
over the
against
fine.
digital
And step
exploitation,
four,
stopping
the
the
state
abuse
grabs
before
that
it
fine
spreads.
money
Which
to
brings
pay
us
for
back to where we
general
started.
government bloat. Dozens
Exactly.
of missing
So,
kids
in effect,
vanished
the
into the
state
shadows
is
of our
taxing
cities.
electricity
But
users to
a
pay for the
massive law
DMV
enforcement
or state
crackdown
salaries
just pulled them
without
back to
ever
safety.
having to
Thank
publicly
God for
vote on a
that.
tax
Truly.
hike.
Hershey says
But it leaves
Maryland
us with
families
this
are being
final
double
thought.
billed.
You pay your
As
regular
police
income
continue to
taxes,
win the physical
and then you
battles,
pay this
kicking down
massive
doors and
surcharge
rescuing
on
kids
your
on the
electric
streets,
bill. It's
will the ultimate fight
incredibly
for our
sneaky.
children's safety
It's politically
move
convenient.
entirely onto the
And
digital
there's a second
screens
layer to
hiding in
this
their own
criticism,
pockets.
the sheer